Hello and welcome to another webinar with America Outdoors Association. This time we're going to be talking a little bit about sustainable energy opportunities and what you can do at your operation to save money and build out some sustainable infrastructure. I'm very pleased to have Karen Short with us, America Outdoors membership and exhibit specialist, producing this. She'll be a little bit behind the scenes, but weigh in if we need it. And Kara Kolovich with Climate Mitigation Strategies, local here in Lander. And I've worked with Kara in the past, I should say, at Knowles when we were both in the Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability Department. Kara was a Sustainability Director. So we're going to have about 45 minutes of presentation, I expect, and we'll have about 15 minutes to answer any of the questions that you have. Please use the question box in the chat box if you like, and post those questions in there. If there's an opportunity for us to weave your question into the presentation organically, we'll certainly do that. Otherwise, our intent is to sort of hold those questions till the end and then answer them as they come across. So you can also, I believe, raise your hand if you have any questions and you want to participate in the conversation at that end. We'll be able to turn your audio on and have you join us. But yeah, I'm excited to hear a little bit more from you. Kara, welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Like Aaron said, my name is Kara Kolovich, and I'm the owner and operator of Climate Mitigation Strategies. The talk I'm going to be doing today, I named Navigating Your Organization's Energy Opportunities. I know this is a little bit different than maybe it was announced in the webinar as maximizing your solar energy credit, but I'm not a CPA per se, so I'm not going to get too far into the weeds of the details of the credits, but I will mention what credits are available and some financial incentives and opportunities there. So hopefully you all will find some of this beneficial anyways. And to be clear, this is my first time using this webinar platform, so if it's a little clunky, just give me a little grace. I'm trying to figure it out as we go along. So some of the outcomes that I came up with for this webinar for you all is one, for you all to become more familiar with the different types of organizational planning structures, especially when it comes to energy and climate change and sustainability. The second outcome is to introduce some of the funding mechanisms that are available, whether that's tax incentives, grants, rebates, and hopefully introduce some new ones to you all. And then finally, for you all to find your organization's starting point or next step in this process. As a disclaimer, down here at the bottom, this presentation doesn't serve as tax advice. I will mention a lot of tax programs, but please inquire with your tax professional if you want to actually get into the nitty-gritty of what that means for your organization. So I'll start with going over 3 different types of planning frameworks. At the basic level, not to say that's easy per se, but at the fundamental level, we have energy planning, and that takes into consideration energy efficiency, on-site renewables, and looking at your transportation fleet. Beyond that, you have some climate change planning, and that incorporates energy planning, but it also addresses how your operations might be impacted by climate change and what you can do to mitigate your impact. And then the last realm, the biggest scope, is sustainability, or ESG, which is known as the Environmental, Social, and Governance framework. And that incorporates more of a social component, whether that's social and environmental justice, or looking at your governance structure to making sure you have diversity, equity, and inclusion involved. So I will now just kind of give a brief overview to those 3 scopes. For energy planning, this last year I worked with the City of Lander to do an energy and environment report. And what we did is on the energy side, we looked at their electricity and their natural gas consumption, and we dived into both the departmental use, so wastewater versus your golf course, community center, but also we drilled down into the meter specific impacts. So what were the energy efficiency measures on certain meters? Were there already, highly energy efficient practices being done at some locations, or where were the other locations that could really use some energy improvements? So drilling down to the meter specific viewpoint and seeing what possibilities lie there. We also looked at their fleet. So both within the fuel consumption and how can they just use less fuel by consolidating routes, but also the age of their fleet. And as they are looking to retire some of their vehicles, say the ones from 1990, what is their plan for purchasing new vehicles? Should they look at electric vehicles, or are they more comfortable with a standard internal combustion engine? Maybe they go from always purchasing pickup trucks to really only needing a compact SUV that gets better mileage. So looking at their fleet composition and making a retirement and purchasing plan so that they can use less energy and save money. Then the third component of that energy plan was also forward-looking for renewable energy. So you can see here, they intend to build a carport on the side of their police department and city hall. And with that carport, they want to put in a couple of electric vehicle or EV chargers. And so it made sense for us to recommend putting on a renewable or a solar panel installation on this facility as well to help offset some of that higher electricity consumption that the chargers will be taking. So again, like thinking of that long term, what do we anticipate our needs being in the future with energy demand? The climate change planning, like I mentioned, it incorporates energy planning, but you also expand it into looking at solid waste and your business travel and how the everyday operations that you do have an impact on the climate through the release of greenhouse gases. So that's quantifying in this plan your greenhouse gas impact and making changes to reduce that impact. Another component to climate change planning is more of a risk management component, and that's looking at both your observed climate change impacts and the ones that are forecasted for your area and how that might impact your operations. So for example, if you have a rafting company, looking at this peak flooding times in the spring and knowing, okay, are we observing more flooding impacts right now? When are those floods occurring? Are they occurring earlier in the spring? Getting a sense of that, as well as later on in the summer and into the fall, what are the water levels looking like? Are you seeing less water in the rivers that are available and affecting your operations? Another one that sometimes people don't think of, but the CDC is highly aware of through climate change is the impacts that vector-borne diseases and insect migrations have. So with things like West Nile or Lyme disease and there being warmer winters, there's not as much of a die-off of these insects, and therefore some of those diseases can spread, and it can impact either your customers, clients, or some of the wildlife that you're used to interacting with. Say if you're like a big game outfitter, you might want to pay attention to water impacts on migration routes for your big game species and how the landscape is changing around you due to climate change impacts. And then, of course, there's wildfires, which I think is on a lot of people's minds, and not only how that could impact your facilities and your property, but also the areas that you operate in. So lastly, sustainability, again, like I said, is incorporating more of that social component. So making sure that the decisions you make are equitable and that you're including that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Here's an example of what we did at Knowles, and Knowles had its own diversity, equity, and inclusion program, so it wasn't necessarily incorporated into this, but you can see how the scope really expanded from just renewable energy or climate change into behavior and education, and environmental stewardship and water conservation. So sustainability is more of like an all-encompassing environmental, social, and economic lens. So for the rest of today's talk, I'm just going to be dialing into energy planning and some of the financial incentives and considerations to have in that space. For energy efficiency, I'm going to start with some of the government incentives. So I'm sure most of you have heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as IRA, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And this put a lot of money into DOE and the EPA to expand programs or to create new programs for tax incentives. And this one listed here, the 17.9D Commercial Buildings Energy Efficiency Tax Deduction, that was expanded from about like $2 per square foot up to $5 per square foot, and from 25% energy savings, or down from 50 to 20. So what this means is you have to show some baseline of energy use. But if you can prove that you've saved, if you became more energy efficient through doing lighting upgrades, or looking at your building envelope and sealing up those drafts, or you got more energy efficient appliances and you reduce your energy consumption, you can apply for that tax deduction. Then at the state and local financing level, this space is a little bit more tricky, and it really depends on what your state offers. Some states are really progressive and have everything under the sun, and some you have to have it legislatively enabled for these programs to take place. So, for example, where I live in Wyoming, CPACE financing is not available, but energy performance contracts are. So CPACE financing, just briefly, it's you are lended money to make energy efficiency improvements or renewable energy installs, and the repayment of that loan is based on the reassessed value of your property. So that's how the local government, the county assessors are involved, is they then, after you're done improving your property, enhancing its value, they take that as the repayment of your loan. Also with energy performance contracts, so how this one works is you put out an RFP for these energy performance contractors to come and do an energy audit on your buildings. And usually they like it to be the quantity enough to be like several buildings, so say your campus. And they come in and they do an energy audit on all the facilities, and they have a list of action items and the expected energy savings and cost savings for that suite of action items. And then they come up with a contract that says, okay, over say the next 10 years, we are going to verify that we will be reaching this energy benchmark of energy savings and cost savings. And that is how they are paid, is they do those savings and they get that money for the 10 years that they do that work. But anything over energy savings that are over what they say, you get during that time period. And after that 10 years, you get to realize all of the savings of the energy improvements that they made. So it's a little bit complicated, but the short and sweet is that this form of financing requires very little input from the actual owner of the property, because the energy contractor comes in, does all the work, does the energy audits, and then you just have to have that mindset of not realizing the full energy savings for a longer period of time, say like that 10 years. But that's a very easy approach to doing energy efficiency upgrades. The last two ones I want to mention here are utility rebates and incentive programs. So we've seen a lot with electric companies and natural gas companies offering rebates. So and really it just depends on your utility company, because each one is going to be different in the amount that they offer and what they offer it for. But for example, my utility, Rocky Mountain Power, they have rebates for air source heat pumps, induction cooking stoves. They had one for variable frequency drives for water pumps and such. And so building envelopes, they have a range of options specifically for businesses to apply for energy efficiency. And on natural gas front, they may be able to provide energy audits free of charge, or have incentive programs for upgrading your furnace and boilers to higher efficiency models. And then this last one I'll mention is the internal systems. And really what this is an internal accounting system, and it's more of a frame of mind. But the idea here is that when you embark on all of this energy improvement, you're starting with the lowest hanging fruit first, and typically the highest return on investment. So you have that energy savings from your first projects, that's going to be a bigger cash amount, and you put that into a fund, and that fund keeps growing as you do energy efficiency projects. And then, 10 years down the line, when you have bigger, more expensive projects, you have a capital reserve to pull from to put towards those projects. So like I said, it's more of like a mindset thing, just making sure that you have a budget set for those bigger projects down the line. So energy efficiency can kind of be distinguished between technological solutions and behavioral solutions. On the technological front, these ones listed here are kind of the biggest bang for your buck, or what you should think of embarking on first. Lighting, such as switching over to LED or motion sensors, sealing drafty windows and doors using variable frequency drives, so those are for your motors. Looking at upgrading your HVAC system or using air source heat pumps. Air source heat pumps are what are diagrammed here on the side. And they're not a new technology, but I think that they're becoming more prevalent now as the federal government tries to incentivize the use of these. And they're more efficient because they're not combusting fuel to create heat, but more just transferring heat from one source to another. So they're highly energy efficient. I think they're like 1.5 to 3.5 times more energy efficient than a combustible heat source. And so then you also have your hot water heaters. And you'll notice on this list, I don't have replacing your windows or your doors, because really those are more expensive to do if you're replacing all of your windows. And honestly, unless it's a single paned window that is really drafty, it's probably not going to be as much of a savings as some of these items. On the behavioral solutions front, the biggest one is always turning down the heat. It's the simplest one you can do, and sometimes the most controversial. But I have an example here from the City of Landers water treatment plant, where they did an energy audit on their treatment plant, which is separated into two parts. One is a garage, which houses their vehicles, and then also a couple chemical lines go through it. And then the other part is their actual water treatment facility. And so they looked at the garage, which is about, I think it's like 7,000 square feet, and it was being heated to 70 degrees. So they said, why can't we just lower that heat down to 59, 62, somewhere in that range, and just spot insulate the chemical lines? And we could put heat tape in there to make sure they don't freeze. But really, we just want to reduce the heat that's being used to warm that huge space. And so through the energy audits, they recommended doing this, and the estimated annual savings was around $12,000 a year. So that is quite a big financial improvement just from turning down the heat. On the renewable energy side, the IRA expanded the federal tax incentive for renewable energy. It was decreasing over the years, but now it's restored to a 30%. And you can add on an additional 10% if you source local materials, as in like nationwide materials, or if you are in a underserved or low income communities. So that would be something to check with your installer if you would be qualified for that, but for sure the 30% tax credit. And then, like I said, state and local financing, it really just depends on where you live. So you can contact your state energy authority to see what type of programs are available in your area. And then utility grant programs. So again, where I live, we have Rocky Mountain Power, and they have a program called Blue Sky, and grants from that program can reach all the way up to 80% of the install and equipment cost. And so that's a huge game changer for a lot of both businesses, nonprofits, municipalities that can take advantage of that. And now I think they're even incorporating batteries into that cost. So every time you try and every time you want to put in a solar panel, it has to have a battery with it. So that's also a benefit for the consumer, because then they can use that solar power off of the solar energy production timeline, and the utility can use that battery if the grid goes down, or to use more of like a smart grid platform. Of course, as far as renewable energy goes and what might be feasible in your space is, of course, the rooftop solar. If your rooftop isn't great, there are ground mount options. These tend to be more expensive because you have to do some anchoring, obviously. And then another option that a couple of different people do here in Lander is the geothermal. And again, similar to the air source heat pumps, where they're not combusting fuel, but they're simply transferring heat from one area to another. It's using a lot less energy to do the system like this. And for the vertical ones, you have to make sure you're not hitting bedrock or something, but they have horizontal systems as well, where you don't have to dig down as far. So it's very adaptable to the location that you're at. So you may be asking, like, do these technologies make sense in my location or my business? What is the payback period? It's really hard for me to tell you what your payback period is going to be, because the situations change from location to location. A spot where you have less sunlight annually, you're not going to have as quick of a payoff on that, because you're going to be generating less electricity. Similarly, you may not have the incentives or grant programs available to you, which impact the payback period. So it really depends on where you're at and what is available to you. I'm gonna take a drink of water here. Okay, and then vehicles is our last section here. So federal tax incentives, there's a commercial electric vehicle and fuel cell electric vehicle tax incentive, 15% for the vehicle purchase price for a plug-in electric, and I'll get into what that kind of means here in a second. 30% for a full electric vehicle or the fuel cell version. And then that 30% or 15% cannot exceed $7,500. So and to mention that you cannot use it with the clean vehicle tax credit. That one, I'm not quite sure if businesses can use that, but it's worth looking into. And this is one of the parts that I was talking about, that they're like making the rules as it comes. So this tax incentive, I checked the other day, and it might have been this clean vehicle tax one, but they made upgrades to the tax section and what qualifies just last month. So these are evolving, and it's worth checking in as the rules continue to be developed on what exactly the percentages are and what qualifications are needed. As far as the charging stations, let me get this over here real quick. Oops. So you can get up to 30% of the installation and equipment costs off, up to $100,000 per charger, or 6% in the case of property subject to depreciation. So this was another example of a program that was expanded through the IRA. Before it was only $30,000 per charger, so they upped that to $100,000 per charger. And down below here, we have some of the census tract requirements. So you can't be in an urban area or where the poverty rate is at least 20%, or metropolitan and non-metropolitan area where the median family income is less than 80% of the state level. So it's good to read the fine print. Again, this is not tax advice, but these are just general guidelines and things to be paying attention to make sure that you can check some of the boxes when you're planning to make these investments. All right, so getting a little bit into the different types of electric vehicles that I mentioned. You have the full electric vehicle, which does not have an internal combustion engine, right? So you just plug it in and it runs off of solely the battery. Then you have this plug-in hybrid vehicle, which still has an internal combustion engine. It's more as a backup, but you primarily use the battery. And then they're not mentioned on here is just the regular, the first hybrids that came out, and those do not have a battery plug-in. Those recharge based on the braking systems, and they use both the internal combustion engine and the battery as well, but they are not, you physically do not have a plug-in. And so those are not included in this financial package through the Federal Infrastructure Reduction Act. And then the last one here is the fuel cell electric vehicle. So you'll notice in the diagram, it doesn't have a plug-in charger either, but it more relies on compressed hydrogen and to run the electric motor. And I haven't seen as much of these on the market yet. I've heard, buzz about hydrogen vehicles, but I just haven't seen them or heard much about them yet. So they are included, but personally, it's like wait to be seen on how those are introduced into the market. Biggest question I get around electric vehicles is the battery question, right? And so there are conflicts with the sourcing of materials, as there always is with mining, but I think that the rate at which the need for batteries has grown so substantially in a short amount of time, the industry is doing a little bit of catch up on the regulations, and some countries have less regulations than others as far as like human rights and also environmental contamination. It's not to say that the oil and gas industry doesn't have its own contamination issues, like environmental contamination or workers' rights, but just to be cognizant that all of them have their pitfalls, right? And it's good to be aware of it and to be mindful in your purchasing. So in battery world for EVs, there are two main batteries out there. There's the nickel, cobalt, manganese, and then the lithium iron phosphate. And a lot of these materials within the batteries can actually be recycled at the end of use. So that's a good thing. And they each have their different characteristics. So in this graph here on the right, you can see that, if you're in a cold weather environment and you want the Rivian high-powered truck, you may want to go more with like the nickel, cobalt, manganese. And you don't have to make that decision necessarily, but the dealers and the car manufacturers are going to be making that type of a vehicle. Versus if you are in a more temperate climate and you're looking to transfer all of your fleet over to EVs, this lower cost lithium iron phosphate one might be more suited for what you're needing. So that's just something to keep a track of as battery development continues. And it's already improved a lot. I can expect that it'll improve even more with all the financing going towards it right now through the federal government. A little tutorial on EV chargers. So we have 3 different levels. Level 1, it's pretty easy. You can just plug it into your normal 120 volt outlet in your garage. It does take quite a bit longer to charge, so just to be mindful of that. Usually what organizations, municipalities go for is the level 2, and even it can go in your house too. I've seen many Tesla versions of this installed in people's houses. These are a faster, like overnight charger, but you may need to upgrade your electrical panel, which means that it'll cost a bit more. So that's something to consider for your guys' fleets. That would be perfectly suitable. And then level 3 is more commercial applications. So these are those DC fast chargers on the interstate highways right now. They're building a lot of those out across the nation. And really, it's even better than 1 to 2 hours now. It's more like 20 to 30 minutes that you're looking at. So as you think about if you want to go into this electric vehicle route, you know, thinking about, okay, how much is the distance that we need to cover? Usually the range right now is between 300 and 500 miles per charge. So keeping that in mind. And then where are the charging stations along the routes? And does it make sense that you can stop here and wait for 20 minutes to your vehicle to charge while people are buying groceries for their trip or something, and then continue on your journey? So kind of have a strategy, a charging strategy for if you want to adopt EVs. Even if you don't want to adopt electric vehicles, the fuel efficiency for new vehicles has improved dramatically. So if you are looking to buy a new car or SUV, replacing it from the 90s would still be a huge improvement as far as fuel efficiency and cost savings go. So just keeping that in mind, like, yeah, your old like 1990 Subaru may have like a lot of like emotional attachment, but also the newer ones have much better fuel efficiency out there. All right, kind of wrapping this up with some goals and continuing to measure your progress. Some things to think about as you're taking this all in and saying, like, where do I want to start, is like, how does your organization want to engage with this? Do you want to make it its own program? Do you want to just kind of see how, you know, ad hoc, when things become available, take advantage of certain tax incentives? You know, what makes sense for your facilities and operations? Like I mentioned with the renewable energy, you know, maybe your place isn't great for solar, or maybe the financial incentives just aren't there for a payback period. You know, what works within your budget and with what capacity you have to follow up on some of these programs. Do you want to set goals and timelines to these actions? Do you want to, you know, take it seriously and say, okay, within the next 10 years, we want to reduce our kilowatt consumption by this much, and then follow that up with, here are the measures that we need to take in order to reach that goal. And it makes it more of a, the whole organization is on board with helping reach that goal. And lastly, it always takes somebody to lead the initiative, whether that's like a green team or someone who spearheads and you know, calls the energy state office to ask about the different programs available, but someone needs to be leading the initiative. So having a designated person to help the organization work through this is essential. And then lastly, you know, measuring your progress as you go along. How do you measure? Well, utility bills are actually a great source of data. You can see month to month how your different actions are impacted either by what you did or what the weather was like that year. And a lot of utilities have, you know, years of data that you can go back to on their online portals. So you compare months from the same month, years going back, to make sure that, you know, there aren't any weather variability changes. Similarly, you can look at your fuel records month to month, year to year, to see what's been changing. And then I would also recommend looking at both this data as far as intensity ratios and your total usage. So intensity ratios can look like, you know, how many clients did you have that year versus the year previously? Maybe you had like a record year one year and just an average year the next year. And how did your energy use differ? And you can put that into like a kilowatts used per client or something like that to compare. And then also your total usage just how much are you using overall? And there's always going to be some baseline of energy usage. So just keeping track of both of those would be something I would recommend. And then reflecting on seeing whether you're getting the results that you expected from the onset. If you're doing some energy efficiency updates and you're expecting a bigger return on your investment, you can ask questions like, was there something else that we didn't see that was preventing that payback? Or did we not do the full project and now we need to look at the full building envelope instead of just one drafty window? And then lastly, calculate the cost savings and anticipate future savings. You can kind of extrapolate some of the savings you may have incurred in one building and say, oh, well, that leaky window was in this building. We have the similar square footage in this other building. We can kind of associate what our savings might be in that one as well. Some further resources. So like I mentioned, the US White House is trying to draft out these fact sheets for the financial incentives on the IRA. And some of the rules as they're written get adapted a little bit. So you can either look on those US White House fact sheets or go to like the DOE or the EPA actual rules. And they should list there what they expect to be the rules at that point in time. Energy Sage is great for renewable energy, and they have a comparative installer reviews, and you can look up installers near you for solar energy, see if anybody's commented on their service or their quality. So Energy Sage is a great resource. And then if you're interested in comparing, traditional vehicles versus the plug-in hybrid versus the full electric, this vehicle cost calculator by the US DOE is actually a really great tool because you can select it based on the model and the type of vehicle that you want and see if there are any of those options, like the EV options available. And it does a, what do they call it? A complete life cycle cost analysis. So it takes into consideration maintenance costs that you might expect to see in each type of vehicle. The upfront cost, it gets pretty close to what the MSRP is for those vehicles. And then, the fuel cost based on your region with your electric costs and any charging that may have to be done. So it's really a comprehensive look and might help you make those decisions based on actual facts and figures. So that is all that I have for you today. Hopefully you had at least a couple of good nuggets in there. And I know there's a lot of information and especially, detailed information in some parts, but this recording will be available to you afterwards. So you can definitely go back in through the slides and copy and paste anything that you want to look up afterwards. If you would like to follow up with me directly on anything that you heard, my email address is right there, and I'd be happy to kind of go through consultation with you or just talk about what you found interesting and where did you like to go. So with that, Aaron, I will give it back to you, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. That's a lot to consume.
It's a lot
in a short amount of time. Yeah, so I'm glad we recorded it so you can catch some of this. So I have a couple thoughts, and then we'll see if any questions pop up from the audience, right? But like I think that there's sort of like probably three ways, I guess three primary motivators for folks who want to like engage in some level of sustainability, like project building. There's like the morality piece, right? Like you're concerned about the future of the earth, so you want to do your part. There's the savings piece, and I think why like this conversation is timely is because it's probably it's never like there's never been a more affordable time to try to put in primarily like solar infrastructure or possibly even to like buy an electric vehicle, right? Like, and the infrastructure really hasn't been there up to now to be able to do that in a meaningful way. So I think it's timely that we're having this conversation. And then I think the third reason that people are interested in this is like the marketing opportunity, right? And so in some cases, like you're just thinking about curb appeal, and you know, you want to have like solar panels, for example, that are very visible for guests who like might literally be driving down the road and trying to pick which out of these 6 outfitters I want to go with today, right? Or you might want to have like those like charging stations highly visible to attract those potential customers who have electric cars. But for something like a geothermal system, where there's it's kind of this invisible thing, and like I think the cost savings are real, the energy credits are real, or the tax credits are real for folks who want to install that. But in terms of interpretation, like, do you have some thoughts or ideas about how like my invisible sustainability project can still help with my marketing, and how can I interpret like this stuff? Have you seen some examples of that?
Yeah, great question. As far as like the invisible but very impactful initiatives, I would say try not to, you know, you can educate people on how they can do it at their own place, and also like, you know, flaunt a little bit of what you guys are doing. But I think it comes off really well if you say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and here's what you can do. People always get inspired by the what we can do out of this, and geothermal systems are a great example of what you could do at your house. You know, some properties are more limiting than others. You may live in an apartment, but having a model which people can then take back to their communities and see the value either at their house, or, you know, engage with their local government to say, what would a geothermal system look like, and what are the cost savings for taxpayers? So you can have that model that people can grasp onto.
Yeah, that's great. I think too, it might be worth it for this conversation that we spend a little bit of time looking at some of these alternative fuel vehicles. If you're looking at something like E85, right, which is a car that can take mostly ethanol. If you're looking at a car truck that is diesel that can run on biodiesel, and you're sort of more or less ready to go for that. First of all, are like those kinds of builds eligible for this energy credit? And second of all, like you know, it feels like there was sort of like a bubble of interest in that, and it's on the decline. And so I think my question is like, are those still viable technologies that people should explore, or are we a bit over the hump on that stuff?
Yeah. So the tax credit, I believe, is eligible for those E85 natural gas, which was the CNG phase, the biodiesel. I believe it is applicable for those. The only thing is that, yeah, the infrastructure just hasn't been built out as much with those technologies as it will be for EVs. The federal government is highly incentivizing the build out of EVs all over the interstate corridors, highways, major highways in each state. So they're really putting a lot of money behind this, whereas we just haven't really seen that with CNG or with biodiesel.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Some folks have had like challenges, as I understand it, with like biodiesel, just like the fuel is hard to work with and filter in cold climates, right? So I think there's like success, but then you have to do some workarounds. And I would mention too, like anecdotally, I follow some folks who like talk about electric cars a lot on YouTube, and a couple of guys like bought a Rivian so that they wouldn't be necessarily compelled to give a favorable review to Rivian. They're a couple Bostonians, and that thing wouldn't start. They're like, didn't go at all.
Yeah, and that's
I don't know
something
if it's like the battery or something else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something to pay attention to. Like, where are you situated geographically? How cold do your temps get? Is your car parked outside all the time, or do you have a heated garage that it stays in? Like, what do your trips look like? How far are you driving? Like, all those things play into it. And I know that there are the skeptics and there are the diehard believers. So you kind of have to sift through it and just make sure that it makes sense for you and in your operations.
there's the price point too. Like a Rivian's going to cost, I think, around $100,000. 4D Lightning, which is like not a real truck, right? Like I think you're not even supposed to like put like a camper on it or anything like that, right? It's like it's just a bed, but it's a lot cheaper, right? So like if you're looking at like what kind of truck options could I have, I think there's more coming online. And well, there's one more thing I want to say about that, and then I'm gonna talk just about like lithium sourcing and ask another question. And like I think a lot of our folks would be really psyched to see like electric 9 to 15 passenger vans, right? I don't know when those are coming along. I don't know if you have any insight to that. I see like Ford is making a lot of electric cargo vans with like 150, 170 mile range, like for shipping companies, but that's about all I've seen on like the van front.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much on the van front either. And maybe that means like, yeah, you have 5 vans in one car, and maybe only the one car is the one you can transfer over to EVs until technology catches up. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Hopefully it's on the horizon soon. Electric buses are out there, but not really the kind of buses that I think our folks need to drive, which need to have clearance, right? Like need to be fairly burly, like not a city bus,
right?
That's the electric buses out there.
Mm-hmm.
But like they're coming along, and it's really like waiting for that price point, I think, to get down to a point where using sources like the calculator that you put out there, it actually makes more sense to buy that electric vehicle from a cost savings perspective. So like that question about or that credit you mentioned about like charging stations and having up to $100,000 in credit for putting these charging stations in, like that seems, I'm surprised that a charging station costs $100,000.
Yeah.
Is like what I'm contemplating, right? Like,
yeah, well, like I said, it might not just be the charger and the electrician it takes to install it, but also if you need to update your electric service panel, that's another cost. Or if you find out that you're an old building and you're no longer in compliance, like you may need to like get up to that stage of being able to even host electric service or electric vehicle charger. So I think some of those costs can really add up. So that's why they maybe push it up a bit.
that makes sense. I was looking at like Tesla chargers in particular. And like you can be, I think, a Tesla partner if, and I'm not sure about this, like this is just one website source, so I'm just going to put this out there. But you have to have at least 2 charging stations that are dedicated to Tesla owners. You have to put up like 6 total charging stations at a minimum that are all Tesla, and like then like that's it, right? You just sort of like you don't pay them anything, they don't pay you anything. You just sort of attract Tesla people to your property, probably.
Yeah.
I think they probably are really looking at doing things like that, like supercharger stations that like bigger towns necessary, as opposed to like sort of the end of the road where like you're going to find our people. So I don't know how viable that is, but I'm interested in that.
Well, one thing that, I mean, it's not a direct apples to apples, but the town of Jackson, kind of their mentality now is with any new builds that they do, they're putting the electric lines out into the parking lot. Even if they don't have the money up front to put in electric vehicles, at least when they're wiring their new building, like they already have the electricians on site. They already have, they can just extend that wire out into the parking lot. And then, 3 years down the road or whatever, when they have the capability to put in EVs, it's so much easier to do that instead of trenching up the new garden that you put in or the new lawn or landscaping and just doing it from right there. So that's one like forward thinking mentality that Jackson's doing right now.
That's cool. I'm just slightly suspicious that they're also thinking about just having heated parking lots.
Heated parking lots? Yeah, melt all that snow.
I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised to see that. Like one thought on lithium sourcing. I just saw this yesterday. Like like it, this is not like a Tesla commercial, but like they tend to be pretty prominent in this space. Like I believe there's an option that they're coming forth with around responsible lithium sourcing, and you can actually like at some level like engage with this program to ensure that like your lithium is coming from places that have good human rights history with their mining practices, et cetera. And I hope to see something like that like further expand to address some of this. And yeah, I think ultimately like if and when we end up in an electric future, that like the net mining requirements are significantly less than they are in sort of in an oil and gas economy, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's such a tricky thing. And I've read some articles, and I forgot the name of this organization, but they're trying to do like a certification of the supply chain for battery mining. So similar to like, there's a palm oil certification for sustainably harvested palm oil. They're going to try and do something like that for mining. So it's just so complicated because you have the places where it's mined, the places where it's manufactured, the transport. So it's the whole supply chain that you need to kind of certify as being, I don't even know what you would say, like non-harmful, or, because mining is harmful, but you have to mine anyways if you want to drive. So yeah, less harmful practices, I guess, a certification for that.
yeah, it's similar to like if you really want to, get into the weeds on this stuff, like looking at the mix that your electric company uses, like to deliver electricity to you, right? And like depending on where you are, that mix can vary fairly dramatically. And like one of the things that I think a lot of folks can do is that you can buy, like you can pay credits. In this case, it's like I think it's called the Blue Sky program. You can like pay more so that they're ostensibly like spinning the windmill for you, right? Like those programs are out there. There's also like carbon offset programs that sometimes people will sign up for, or they'll make available to their guests if they want to say, offset their own travel to get to the destination or while they're there. And folks can utilize those. And I think I'm leading to a question here. I promise, right? And that is like what do you think of those programs? Do you have do you see a benefit in carbon offsets in particular? Like, is that a good thing to do? And if we have a couple minutes, like after answering that question, we could maybe just talk about like those power company grants and what the trade is there in terms of like energy credits.
Yeah. Well, you're right about like it totally depends. To back up a little bit to your point about the energy mix of your utility. So for example, our utility here in Wyoming, Rocky Mountain Power, has a very coal heavy, natural gas heavy mix. But over the next couple decades, they are required to they are phasing out those coal plants, and they are integrating more renewables and battery storage, or multiple types of storage. So I sometimes have the question of like, people very concerned about climate change, and they're like, should I get solar panels? I'm like, well, it depends. Your grid is getting greener, so necessarily like unless you want green energy right now, like you don't have to. And then there's that cost savings part. Like, do you have the tax incentives to do it, or are you going to save energy with the amount of solar that you get? So as far as like doing it for a green perspective, yeah, go for it. But also know that your grid is getting greener. By 2050, a lot of utility companies have to be near net zero, if not net zero. So so just know that the trend is going that way, whether you do anything or not. And your question about carbon offsets, you know, it's always better not to do the action in the first place. So trying to be less consumptive for what you have power over is always going to be way better than doing a carbon offset. That being said, there are plenty of reputable carbon offset companies out there, but you know, they're relatively cheap, which I'm like, how is it so cheap to offset my usage? It kind of feels weird to me to have it be so cheap. But one that I'll put out there is called the Gold Standard, and they align with the UN's sustainable development goals. So if you wanted one that's aligned with like eliminating poverty as one of the sustainable development goals, and increasing like local solar opportunities or renewable energy opportunities, like they have specific offset programs that check certain boxes off of those development goals. So I like supporting that, and it's a big enough company where I'm like, okay, they probably have like a third-party verification on all of their offsets, which is something you definitely want to look for, is like third-party verification on anything that you buy within the carbon offset world.
Yeah, sure. In terms of like, I guess stepping a little bit away from like the like energy build outs, but still in the sustainability space, like if you're thinking about something that is visible and also I would think likely to save you money in some ways, though you have to sort of like pay for the like the official certification would be a LEED certification, right? So like the sustainable building practices that I think it's an association is developed over the years are, I feel, very well respected and trusted in the industry generally. And so if I see like a LEED certified plaque on the front of a building, like yeah, I like that, right? Like I'm like, oh, these guys, that like they mean it, you know. And so like LEED certification is something that you might consider as you're building a new you know, a new structure or something like that. But I think you can sort of like work it into existing structures too, isn't that right? You've fiddled in this thing. I'm sure I know you have, yeah.
Yeah, they have a certification for new constructions and for existing structures. And LEED is one of those things where for the stamp of approval and the LEED certification, that's where all the money's going to, right? Is like having that stamp of approval. And like you say, like it works for marketing purposes. Anybody who's going to the facility can observe and they know what LEED means. And so they automatically have that association. That being said, like you don't care about having the certification, you can go onto LEED's website and see all of the certification criteria, and it's like no new thing that any contractor wouldn't have the skills to do, right? So you can take all those concepts and just implement it for probably half the cost of having a LEED certification, right? Yeah. So you can just take what makes sense to you and your situation and implement it. And then back to my like measuring your progress, you know, measure what the building was using before and measure what it was using after. And you can use that as part of your marketing, even of like, hey, we put in, we changed all of our lights to LEDs and motion sensors. And you can tout how much you saved or how much energy you saved by doing that measure. And that can be a marketing tactic.
Yeah. There you go.
You don't want greenwashing. You want to be able to like verify what you're stating. And so measuring is a great way to do that.
Can I interrupt real quick? Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
If anyone has any questions, we are really close to the end. I do have one comment from Cricket. She said that Volkswagen is doing a 9-passenger van, or she thinks they are. So just thought for research, but if anyone has any questions, I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure we touch that before we leave.
Thank you.
That's great. Get into that space, cool. Volkswagen.
Hear that? Yeah. Well, I'll believe it when I see it. Like they had that like micro van about 4 years ago. Did you see that thing? That thing looked awesome.
Maybe I did not.
maybe is 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, Volkswagen, I don't feel like they're probably the second biggest electric car company in the world, but they are not moving at the pace that they need to survive as a car company.
As long as they don't have their own charger that people need to use, like Tesla, and they go out of business, you know. As long as it's adaptable, it'll be just fine.
Oh, I know, yeah. Tesla is talking about opening up their charger network.
Huh? Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Be good. Gosh, cool. Thank you, Kara. And yeah, appreciate that input, Cricket. Thanks for joining us. Karen, I don't think there's any more questions from the audience, which is good because I had a lot of my own questions and comments to fill up the rest of this time.
Yeah, we can go out for coffee. You can ask all the rest of yours.
Great. Well, great. With that, thank you everybody for joining us. If you have more questions, Kara can help you navigate the maze of climate mitigation. And I encourage folks to reach out to her. And otherwise, I appreciate you spending some time with our industry sector and helping us think about ways that we can save money and help save the planet at the same time. Thanks a lot, Kara.
All right, thank you all for having me. Bye.